All right, we did it. We are on. For those of you who are watching this after the fact, my suggestion is you scrub it about 10 minutes forward. That's when we're like officially going to start, as I have to run around and update the stream links to to the various places that have signed up to see the show. Bum, 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 bum. Oh, I need to bring up Twitch, make sure it's running. Okay. Okay, let's see. Asher, while I'm doing this, tell me about your day.
Mondays and Thursdays I teach 3 classes, so full day. Did a writing workshop.
Oh, what was the assignment?
They're writing image analysis, so they read an essay by Roland Barthes on rhetoric of the image. So his question is like, do images convey meaning in a way that is structured like a language? Yes or no? And then he writes out an answer to that. And he says, yes, they do communicate in a structured way, but it's different from verbal language. So then I just asked them to write an essay on using that same framework that he lays out in the essay. I've been teaching this for years and I don't know why. I don't know why it's a moment in the class where we stop and like write a paper, especially since many of them have already written such essays at earlier points in their education. I will say that I'm starting to get like a deluge of AI written papers, and
And you can tell it's very easy.
Yeah, it's like very
because
general.
They all look the same. You figure it out pretty quick, the little quirky things.
It's like instead of responding to the assignment about this article, I'm going to write an essay on that provides an overview of all communication.
Yeah.
It's like, you don't know. You don't know this. You're this class to take this history. You don't know it yet.
It's also a little bit funny because it's like that's the real heart of the problem for me with AI is like I find it super helpful. I use it all the time, but just the urge to be like, oh, I'm not even going to look at it.
Yeah.
Is very high. And I might do that urge in a second. Allison just popped on, but she's not really on. She's fixing her camera. So we'll post her in a second. Can I turn me a little bit? Okay. So what am I missing?
That's my issue with AI written emails. No. She can't make the camera work.
The mic is almost the bigger issue.
Mm-hmm. Maybe restart the computer?
Yeah. Here's our chat. Okay. Somebody in chat asked me to move up the mic. Tell me if that fixed it. I did turn up our mics a little bit. Oh, my mic is too loud. So here we go. There we go. What am I missing? Oh. Well, I gotta find. Where? I have it up somewhere. Yeah. The only suggestion I have, Allison, is turning it on and turning it off again. Also, I suppose there's a suggestion that's like grab a different headset. All right, so now going to announce it in Discord. Twitch talking about. All right. Camera was unplugged, now plugged, but still nothing. Yeah, I think you should maybe just try a full restart of your computer. Sometimes with cameras. Oh, there you go.
Yay.
Hey, welcome. Welcome to the podcast.
Can you talk?
How? Almost there. Okay. I'm on Twitch talking about.
I have the least amount of problems getting on this time.
Yeah, it's one of those things. It's very crazy writers promote. Where's the promo tab? Alice, she's still working. Okay, so help me. What books do you think that this connected with? Like, did this make you think about other books?
Made me think about Marshall McLuhan.
I'm not familiar.
He's like the figure most familiar with a theory of media called media ecology, and it's basically like our technology, like we're animals and the environment we're in is media. So any change in technology changes the human animal. I really thought that with the story about the remem, what is that called? The truth of fact, the truth of feeling. With the two parallel stories. One is the oral culture, and the other one is the digital culture. So, usually in my media intro fundamentals class, we read McLuhan because he's so influential. But this time I'm just like, we don't need to read McLuhan. I'm just going to replace that essay with this short story because it communicates media ecology, I think, in a way that they'll understand. Unbearable lightness of being, yeah. The anxiety of freedom has a part like eternal return. Oh my god, I can't. Einmal is keinmal. Once is never. Once is never. So how to relate that to exhalation?
I have no. Once is never. I've never.
Yeah.
I don't know that one.
Yeah. And also, is that Ed? Who's Telhard Castrop?
Live. Okay.
Yeah, they disregard their actions unless many of their paraselves did the same thing. That's kind of like that last story, I suppose. Hi. The last story where they're opening up these portals.
Okay. I am officially. Oh no. No, there's one last place that's very important for me to post.
Thank you for running the show.
Live. Barely. I'm so. Listen. After I have a whole plan set up, and we're gonna knock it out of the park next season. We have 3 books picked. I've got those 3 books set up, and I am gonna start this off right away, doing the thing, which is no, here. Okay.
I don't remember that story.
There we go. We have season 2 up. We're gonna take a month off. We're gonna come back Monday, April 14th. Right now is the plan, and then we'll do a book a month roughly. For these, we've been going kind of like every 5 weeks, so it'll probably be the same. But we're gonna take this month off. We're gonna revamp some of these procedures so we can start right at 7 and have a little more glitz and glam in the way that we interface with everybody. Also, I'm going to make sure that all the slides are like built beforehand, because my slide today is going to be funky. All right. I need to click on this to see. I can't see Allison at. Oh, there she is. Okay.
Sweet.
Was this success, or are you still working on microphone? Yeah,
no.
You're still working on a microphone. Do you have a headset that you can just plug in? You have a child that has a headset. There has to be a Bluetooth. You're saying no. All right. While you're working on that, I am going to start. And I did roughly the same thing that we were complaining about when we started this. I asked Claude, can you make me slides? And this is what it gave me. All right, so these slides might have nothing to do with the talk that I'm about to give you. Okay, where am I at? No, first off, I'm going to introduce No, is Allison gone?
She makes the cutest faces. Trying to figure out The computer.
But can I get rid of this? No, that's not the right button. Stop sharing for a second. If I put her away. There.
Yeah,
Okay.
I like that.
I'm gonna introduce Ashar. Ashar is a good friend. Ashar ran into me in Chicago on her way to a completely crazy house that's built up in Wisconsin. And it's like sort of the anti Frank Lloyd Wright has built a house out there, and we ran into each other and we decided to start this book club, and that's how it started. I am just going to introduce myself. I am Daniel Andrew Boyd, and I am in the hot seat today to give this thing. We've built Detention Book Club for two sorts of people. Number one is the sort of person who loves book clubs, but nobody ever reads the book, and that really bums them out. So we make sure that we always read the book. And the second person we built this book club for is the person who shows up to book club because they love talking about books, but they don't have time to read the book. So whether you read it or not, this is Detention, and you're about to get just an insane info dump because I have too much to say. Okay, building blocks. All right, so I want to be like small in the corner. There. Okay. I don't know how. I'm going to think about this.
He's a technical writer during the day. Wow.
Yeah. All right. So I am changing my mind about how I'm going to do this. I will figure out. Oh, I can share this with you because I posted them on the web. Everybody should be able to see these things. Let me just throw it into chat. So you can look at these as you see fit. And I can roughly leave my our pretty faces up. Okay. So in chat, tell me if you are capable of seeing those and flipping through them at your own pace. This is how those were created, by the way. I did for our I did this speech much more smoothly to our program director. She took notes. She took those notes to Gemini 2.0. Gemini would not make slides for us, so then we took what Gemini thought up and had Claude make the slides. And that's what you're looking at. But I did not get a chance to actually look through those. Okay.
You didn't look at the slides yet?
Oh, yes, I have not gone through these slides.
Okay.
But roughly they're based off a transcript that I did do, which is now finally coming to you, and I'm so sorry that I'm running this late. Okay. So the big thing is one of the that I ran into, which I found interesting and important, is he is like he's won every award, but still has a day job. And so for those of you who are in the list and are interested in being, oh, the slides are not working for people. Oh, but some people can see the slides. Oh, no, everybody says the slides work. Okay. So this is true of all artists. If you make money through your art, the vast majority of your wealth comes through other things. So if you take J.K. Rowling for an example, you would think she sold 100 million books. How could she not make her money from writing books? But she doesn't. Most of her money comes from licensing deals. And I had a trip to Japan a long time ago where I luckily stumbled into this guy who was the artistic director of Harry Potter World, Disneyland, Japan. And he was like, yeah, we're on the phone with her an hour or two every day. She looks at everything. She signs off every contract. Anything we build, we have to show her. And her whole life is just like holding that lore in her head and getting it to these people who are making toys and all these other things and making sure that it's very consistent. Uh, Other people who are interesting, Ridley Scott talks about it a lot, that he doesn't make the majority of his money from his movies, which is like mind blowing to me. But he does mostly commercials, and he'll do like 100 commercials a year so that he can do a movie every 3 years. And he's like, then it doesn't have to make money. Uh, and this just is how it happens with most people who are artists. If they become famous, then it's just easier to do commercials. So like everybody makes their money doing commercials. Who? Okay, so that was interesting about him and the way that that ties in. And this lesson is going to be a little bit disjointed, but these pieces are all connective building blocks that I think help you understand the work, and you just need them, even though there's not a huge tie. But the little tie that pieces this in is he has a I feel he has and through the interviews, he has a very anti-capitalist view of society. That he thinks it hasn't worked out, that he's sort of in this realm of uh in this realm of like, this is just late stage capitalism and how it works, and it doesn't help us. I don't know if in chat, can you see this? Like, which stories bring that out for you? We're gonna focus mainly on two stories. We're gonna talk about the very first one, the Merchant and the Alchemist Gate, and then we're gonna talk about the second one, which is, or not the second, but the second story that we're going to talk about is the truth of feeling and the truth of fact. But there's other stories that you can kind of like bring out. Like, does that ring true to you, Ashar?
Yeah, that's what we discussed.
Yeah. So like the ones about the dingy mons and how exploitive we end up like even exploiting these like program creatures. There's the trials and tribulations of the generations through the robotic nanny, and how he tries to make this thing make money, and how people make money sort of bashing it and blah blah blah. The next thing that I want to talk about is just roughly about genre in particular. So when you think about genre, I've found some people have trouble with this. Like, what is genre? In Neil Gaiman's Masterclass, he talks about how it was years and years before he understood genre, and he was like, I like cowboys and I like spaceships and I like all these things, and I can tell a story in any of them, and I just don't see like, what does it mean to have genre? And like, people would try to pigeonhole me and I wouldn't get it. And finally somebody told him, he was like, yeah, you can have a Western setting that's not a Western. A Western, that genre, actually has very specific tropes that people are looking for. And so Western is a genre, and romance is a genre, and in a real way, Literary fiction is a genre, and science fiction is also a genre. But I'm making the argument that science fiction is very different than these other ones. So, what are some tropes that you find in various genres?
In science fiction or
In any of them, like what do you think of? And this is for chat or for anybody who's listening. Like, if you think about romance, what do you? I think that's like the easiest one. What do you think about? What do you think has to be in a romance? What do you think has to be in a high fantasy novel?
There has to be a problem and solution, and it's the same problem and roughly the same solution. So in romance, the problem is being single, especially if you're a woman, and then the solution is love. And then what did you say? High fantasy?
Yeah.
I've read The Hobbit.
Yeah.
And that's about it. I can't comment.
So, but The Hobbit sets it up for all of them, and the thing is, they're pretty strict.
I don't even know what the problem in The Hobbit is. It's like Bilbo Baggins' insularity or something.
So, The Hobbit is different than the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and I get them confused. But The Hobbit is they have to go kill a dragon. In romances are pretty strict in how they stick together. So you will always have a meet cute. You will always have a lover where the reader hates this person and doesn't think they should be together. You will always have somewhere around the third act a breakup. And in the end, as Ashar was saying, you will always have this point where they get back together. That's the solution. It's always happy. If they don't get back together, it's not really a romance. Science fiction sort of is this genre where you pick it up and there's a spaceship on the cover, but you don't know what's in the rest of it. There might be romance. There might be dragons, but the dude who's flying on the dragon has a laser sword. They might be searching for a MacGuffin like the Lord of the Rings. So it's sort of like science fiction is cosplay for all these other genres. They get to put on their little cool high-tech things. And the reason that I'm taking this time to delineate this is because people fight about what genre of science fiction he is. But when he talks about it himself, he likes to hit up this Faulkner quote where he says, all powerful literature, all good literature should be about the heart in conflict with itself. And all of his stories are doing that. All of his stories are working on this idea that he's processing thoughts and feelings in his life, and he's trying to figure out how to articulate that. So he uses fiction to create a point and a counterpoint. And I think for me, reading his work, that harkens a lot back to Aldous Huxley and my reading of his stuff, where he would have these novels where it's just characters who have opposing points of view and they sort of hash it out throughout the novel. And in these stories, that's what he's working on all the time. So the major thing that he's working on and trying to find a way to articulate in this first story, the merchant and the alchemist gate, is that he has a unique view on free will. And so there's two opposing sides on free will. There is the people who believe in it, and we have choices, and we make them, and we have agency. And then there are people who are called determinists, and they believe we don't have free will. Ted Chiang tries to sort of bridge a gap by saying he's a compatibilist. He thinks that there is determinism. We don't make any choices throughout life, but that doesn't take away our agency. Does that paradox, like, even if you like I don't agree or don't or like does that make sense? Just that basic level of it? If I say determinism, do people understand what that means? And if you have questions, you can ask questions. So he wanted to write a story about compatibilism, and he does it here where he has this protagonist character. And we first meet him. He gets brought to the king. This is a story that, again, you think of science fiction, it's in the future. This is a story about way in the past. And he gets brought to this king in chains. And the king is like, people are texting me. If it is possible, rather than texting me on my phone, feel free to throw any thoughts into chat. And I can adjust my mic one way or the other if my mic needs to be louder or softer. This guy gets brought into the king in chains, and he's like, these guys told me to tell you this story. And he starts the story off. He ran into this cool merchant. The cool merchant he's a merchant. He runs into this alchemist. He's going to buy some trinkets. The alchemist says, I've got this really cool thing to show you. It's a gate that goes back in time. And he explains it, and he shows him how he does it. And right as the guy's like, I could use this thing, somebody pops out of the gate and tells him a story. And each time the story gets to the really good part, the person meets someone from the future or someone from the past, and that person tells the person inside the story. So there keeps being these multiple nested stories interrupting the original story. Finally, when it all wraps up in the end, we get back to this guy in chains, and he's like, so I went through the gate, and I went through the gate because I really needed to see my wife. And I'd heard all these stories of all these people who had tried to change their past and they couldn't do it. But I needed to try. I needed to try for myself. Because the last time he had talked to his wife, he had been sort of mean to her about this petty stuff. And it gnawed at him. But through strange twists of fate, he can't get to her before she dies. And he's standing in front of this mosque that is in rubbles, and it's where she died. When a woman comes up to him and asks if he's the husband, if this merchant is the husband of this woman who died, who's praying at the mosque, he says yes. And she gives him this message that the wife wanted him to know, you were the best thing in my life, and you brought me so much joy. And he deals with this by feeling like, even though I couldn't change the past, by simply trying, I'm reframing the whole narrative. I've found out new information. And that changes it for me. And it ends on this hopeful note. So the idea is sort of, even though fate is determined, either because we're meat robots or because we made all these choices in the past that lead us always to fall probabilistically making a very specific choice. We can still look back at the choices that we made and have sort of distinct thoughts about them. And we can change how we're feeling about them. And we still treat those choices with as though they had agency. And that is a very hopeful feeling that he ends the story with. This is in drastic contrast to other stories of time travel where they have a fixed outcome in the past, where you try to go back to kill Hitler and it's just impossible, and people try and try and try and it just never works, and it ends in this sort of bleak sadness that we're just stuck repeating our mistakes. But maybe that repeating of mistakes can be a journey worth doing. And yeah, and so that's sort of the end of my preamble there, and then I'm open to like chatting about it. Do you have thoughts?
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that goes to what Ed was saying about unbearable lightness of being. Like, it doesn't matter. It's like more weighty if you've done it, if your multiple selves have done the same thing over and over and over again. I think that's what that means. It's been a while since I've read Unbearable Lightness of Being. But I was thinking too, like the guy who owns the gate calls it alchemy. And he's trying to explain what he means by that. He's like, it's not the metallurgical stuff. It's way easier than that. And the other component of alchemy that isn't the metallurgical stuff is spiritual. So it is contemplative. It doesn't even involve chemistry if you don't want to do the chemistry. But there is like the practice of alchemy that is an understanding of change and like the permanence of change. Which is interesting because this is like nothing that you do is going to change the outcomes, but there is this attitudinal aspect of it. So it's the attitude with which you approach the thing that you know is going to happen. That's what matters. And maybe that's where you have the choice.
Yeah.
It reminded me of like the Greek myths. Like anytime a mortal encounters a god, they get their ass burnt up. But there are stories where they are encountering the god with like piety, and then there are stories where they're encountering the god with like, oh, they're like bathing naked, oh yeah, and then they get burnt up also, but it's like way worse. So I'm just thinking, like, that is a difference in attitude. So if you're approaching the bathing Diana with a lust to see, her dogs tear you apart. But if you approach like Zeus with a desire to behold him and his godhead, to see divinity, you are also burnt up, but maybe that person gives birth to like Hermes or something. You know, there's something else that comes out of it. It's not just a horrible scene.
Yeah.
And that's the difference there is attitude, not outcome, really.
Yeah. One of the things I ran into when I was talking about this issue was if you're religious, the deities, be it Yahweh or Jesus or whatever, treat you as though you have agency. So like, and I think that also like affects the thought of it here is like, where do you have a better world or a worse world if we treat people like they have no agency? Like that is a wild thought experiment to be like, oh, nobody's culpable for anything. We're just figuring out how to deal with them regardless. I have trouble even like going down that thread to be like, oh, these people, some people don't have agency, and it becomes one of the other thoughts of like how society works, in that, if somebody who is mentally handicapped does something inappropriate, we treat that very differently than somebody with a higher intelligence. We treat somebody who's blinded with rage differently than we treat somebody who's cold and calculated. And that's a reality of the system we live in. My journey to the past changed nothing, but what I had learned had changed everything. Yeah, there's an attitude change. Without free agency, punishments for being punished become cyclical. Can you go more into that, Replica?
Yeah, what does that mean?
I feel like my guesses would be sort of doddering.
But like, yeah, if you think that everything is a lesson for you, I mean, you're talking about like people who have faith, people who believe that they're in conscious contact with God. Everything that happens to them is for a purpose, and the purpose is for them to learn. That's like a way different life than if you're just like feel like things are just happening to you and it's random and it's not like there's no value to it that is that you can derive from it. So those are choices you can make, and again, it's attitudinal. Tautological narrative. So what is tautological narrative? I have to look up tautology. Don't listen to me. It's Monday night. Place in different words.
While she's looking that up, I know that Allison wanted to bring up some things in that she thought those nested stories were important to touch on and were interesting, in that in one of them you have a guy who steals from himself, and in another one you have a wife who goes back in time to teach her husband how to be a good lover. And those are interesting things, and they create these time loops that always happen. Accidental results.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think that this does happen to people, right? Or would at least that is a narrative that we have, that you go to prison and you meet other criminals, and they teach you how to do crime better or differently. And then you come out and it's, we're in this system that sort of repeats that. It's harder to get a job. And now the skill you have learned is, antisocial. Or you're simply, as Replica's putting it, like you're marred with this thing that you're stuck with.
Now I realize, that's a feature of time travel narratives, because it becomes a loop. Like the thing that pulls the person into the story is actually the end of the story, but they get into a loop. I'm just thinking about like this movie, Time Crimes. It's so good.
Oh yeah, it's good.
The guy like observes some weird shit going on at the edge of his garden, and he goes to investigate, and then through a series of errors, he becomes the person who was doing the stuff at the edge of the garden. He was observing himself. And there is also a time machine involved in all this, of course.
Yeah. Okay. So moving on to the next story that I want to sort of do a deep dive into is the truth of fact, the truth of feeling. And he does a really interesting thing here where I think this is a cool thing you guys can do and should try to sort of thought experiment out in your own writing. Is he does two parallel stories, and you could use this framework over and over and over again. So he takes something in the future and he imagines that up as sort of a normal sci-fi story, and then he parallels that same story with some implementation of that in the past. And so you could do it with, flying cars and then have the invention of the first car. You could do it with if you had lightsabers or supersonic guns, you could do it with the first throwing spear and have parallel stories like that to have a sort of conversation. So in that first novel, the people are having conversations with each other. But in this second short story, running parallel, the conversation is happening that way without actually touching each other. The characters don't really have communication between the two. And I'm just going to break, even though it goes, sort of one chapter, sort of back and forth between them. I'm going to break them up into two separates. In the first main narrative, the protagonist is this man who's a journalist tasked to write about a new invention where he gets an implant into his head that gives him perfect memory. And because he's a journalist, he thinks, of course, I'm going to go to the worst memory I have. That's the first place I'm going to go. And his worst memory is his daughter in the kitchen. She's a teenager, and she tells him, Dad, you're the reason Mom left. And then she breaks out in tears and runs away. This is kind of ironic for him because he was like, I didn't even want kids, and now I'm stuck with this bratty one, and she left. She's the one who wanted you. Now he gets this implant. He goes straight to that memory, and he sees that he was 100% wrong, that his ego, in order to protect him, had given him a false memory. And what really happened was that he was the one who was angry about some dishes, and he turned to her and he said, you're the reason Mom left. And this blows up this narrative in his mind where he was this hero dad who did the male thing and balled up all his emotions and stuffed it down and used that as fuel to be the best dad possible. And then finally, when she graduated college, she invited him, and he's like, this is it. We've become daughter and son again, and I've made it up to her. And the real story is he needs to seek forgiveness. But it's been 20, 30 years. How is forgiveness after that amount of time not a burden to the person that you're asking it from? So he goes to her and he says, is this how you remember the story? And she does remember it correctly. And he says, how did you get over this? And she's like, Dad, I went to therapy for like a million years. And finally, my therapist was like, you can't complain about your dad anymore. And you either have to accept him for the shitty dad that he is, or never see him again. And if you accept him, just like wall off some boundaries. And when he annoys you, leave. And she's like, that's how I've handled you for the last 10 years since college. And his mind is blown. And for me, on a very personal level, I don't have perfect memory. But it makes me go back to all these times that I know that people have wronged me in all these like ridiculous, horrible ways. And think about it like, could I be wrong? And even if I'm not, is there a possibility that there's a framing for that story where I'm the one who needs to apologize? Like, I think I need their apology, but maybe it should start with me. And that's how that story hit me. And before we go into the next one, that's my main question. Have you ever run into false memory? Have you ever had a crazy memory where you were like, I really believed it? Asher?
Oh yeah. I never know if you're talking to me or the chat.
Well, both.
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea behind the story is that these could be any memory. It could be any memory, and that
Right.
the bundle that we think of as the self is a story. That, and then what if we had this technology that then would enable us to go back and fact check our account of ourselves? What effect would that have on ourselves? And for him, he finds it useful. The two parallel stories in the story are both about origin stories. In the oral narrative of the Nigeria, like it's the Tiv, so I forget that's Nigeria or Ghana. It's West Africa, but that person doesn't have writing, or he's on the cusp. He's learning writing, and he learns that an origin story is different for an oral culture where it's negotiated. Like who we are as a people is negotiated through storytelling over the generations, and it will change. That story will change. Versus in print, it's a record, and so you can just go to the Bureau of whatever genealogy and like look it up. So you can fact check. And so it's like the history of fact checking, as it's sedimented in, or like cemented in technology, like how does that change our sense of ourselves in tandem with the kind of technology that we have available to us? So yeah, this would mean the remem technology would mean that our sense of ourself is no longer based on a fiction that's itself based on faulty memory, which is necessarily faulty, but here it's based on like a video record.
Yeah.
And so the narrator is like, this is a good thing because I can correct myself.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so that's sort of the second question, which is, even if it's not a false memory, are there memories that are super great that you always go back to? Or are there memories, like, what memories in your life have popped for you where you're like, I love going back to this memory? Without going past PG. The Reman would give you the video audio of events, but I think meaning is still contrived from the context which they are conceived. Yes. Yeah. You know, so the remem, if you got it early enough, was that's a hard science fiction sort of question, and it's a little confusing in the way that the book ends up being. You, if you get it early enough, all your memories are remembered. But if you get it implanted later in life, the memories are sort of called from all these other systems, is the nature of the book, Sam, which I think is what you're getting at.
Yeah. Same. Like living through a text thread, you orchestrate it totally differently than when you read it later.
Yes. Yeah.
I had an entire relationship with somebody by email where I just was like, oh man, we're connecting. This is an amazing conversation. And then I read it over again a year later and I was like, it's just full of innuendo. This was just like a horny conversation. This was not magical. It's like how the text was different from the feeling, which is what people are kind of, it seems to me that that's what people are talking about in the chat. Yeah, your emotions filter communication, or the impressionistic quality shifts.
Yep. And it goes back to that first story, is like you get new information and it recontextualizes it for you.
Mm-hmm.
Which is partly what Beerfinger was throwing up just a second ago. And he was like, it's a band. And the Beerfinger, everybody should go check out. His band is great. And he also writes a lot. So you can find J. Rohr's stuff on the internet, and there's links to some of his stuff on Storyluck. I'm hoping to have him be a special guest for the next season. Yeah, I think that the Beerfinger one is the one that I have the most, and it does come from the text, where I read a text and I'm so mad. I read somebody's post on the internet and I'm just like so mad, and then I walk away and I come back a couple hours later and I'm like, actually, their point is pretty reasonable. So the second story that runs parallel involves a priest who goes to this place to bring religion and to also teach someone how to write, teach a culture how to write. So he goes to this culture where it's all an oral tradition. This young boy becomes the scribe, and over years he runs into all these conflicts where people tell stories, and then he's like, that's not exactly what happened. Let me mansplain to you because I wrote it down. And he has trouble with synonyms. He has trouble with that's close enough. And finally, there becomes this major conflict at the end where they want to find out whether someone is from one tribe or another tribe, and he realizes that the Englishmen who came before he was born would have this information because they were big in keeping genealogies. So they go and find it, and then they rearrange, and then he comes back and he's like, this changes everything. We were wrong about who this guy's father was. And the leader of this tribe is like, hey, you can do what you want to do here, but this will upset the social order of everything. And he's sort of like, there's this truth that is the fact, and then there's this truth that's the feeling. And this guy, who we're trying to figure out who his real dad is, has lived with us forever. He wants to stay with us. And this sort of white lie is the real truth. And what happens if we go with the piece of paper instead? We've already been fighting over this for years. We've just settled it. And the young scribe comes away thinking, yeah, I want this issue settled. And maybe this paper isn't as good for me as I thought it was going to be, which is sort of the polar opposite of that other story. And so it creates this cool tension between them, that these people go through a very similar experience and then come away with different ways to look at it and different ways to treat the issue, and leaves you as the reader being like, how would I handle it? What do I think? Do I want perfect memory? And it's just like a fun thought experiment.
Yeah. In the notes, Ted Chiang says that we're all cyborgs. Like, we're all the combination of technology. So the way that our memory is aided by technology, whether it's just language, writing, print, video, that makes for a different person. And so these two stories have these two characters with one foot in one paradigm and another in another. Oral culture and writing, and then like lived memory and recorded memory. And we ourselves, the readers, are in between print and like digital technology, so we're kind of split as well. And I like this observation that like even if we get a video, like a friend has you send me a screenshot, just because it's a video does not mean that the interpretation of that video or what the image means is going to be the same. Like, there's nothing in a photograph that is hard and fast what it means. There's also context to it. So I guess I wonder, does the story deal with that? No, it seems like in the story, video is a kind of truth. It's like the fact checking aspect of something. Yeah.
That's not a thrust in it, but I would say, because you brought it up, there's the moment where he sort of talks about how her memory was better than his, but as they both decide to get it, the remem, the sort of implant, the daughter does find things where she had taken offense, and when she looks back on it, that she shouldn't have. That there were other like things that her biases warped how she saw reality.
Right. And so going back to the video straightens people out.
Yeah. But to what I think you were saying is, it's not only going back to the video, but it becomes going back to the video and then also having a conversation to the person that you had conflict with.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there's a dialogue to be had, and a little bit, that's like one of the things that Sam threw up, where she was like, I have these fights and people will be like, here's the screenshot, this is what I said, and it's like, yeah, devoid of the context of our entire relationship, that looks fine, but there is a context of our relationship. Like, it's not, our relationship is not that screenshot. Like, all those words are filled with more meaning than just the words.
Mm-hmm.
These stories seem to suggest our pasts may not be as concrete as they seem, and by pasts, I mean people have plural pasts. I think only in the sense of storytelling, in that you get to wrench meaning out of the stuff that happened. I think for Ted, the facts are the facts. These things happened, but we are the storytelling animals that layer those with meaning. And for me as a storyteller, that's very liberating, that we don't have to stick to the first one that comes to our minds. Because I think most people run through that and they do the thing and they don't realize that the thing that they did was a habit, that it was automatic, that most of the actions we take are just determined because our brains are so quick at applying a narrative to the actions we take. And we're like, that's the narrative. But really, most of the time, we are just doing things, and then our brains are figuring out how to justify it. There's a book called The Elephant in the Brain, and it's one of my favorite books on this topic. But it goes through this experiment where they would take people who had this malady called split brain, where the left and right hemisphere don't talk to each other, and so your left and right eye are connected to basically two completely different brains. So you can cover up your senses on one side of your face and show an image to just this one, and then take it off and see what people say. And so like they would show an image to this side and it would say, go up and drink the Coke that's on the table. And then they would close it off and the person would get up and go get the Coke, and they wouldn't have access to this part of this side of their brain. And they'd ask them, why'd you get a Coke? And these people would be like, they would come up with all these reasons because they didn't have access to the real reason, which is the person had just directed them to do it. So I was thirsty. I didn't feel like water. It's wild.
Ideal soldiers.
Yeah.
Killing machines.
On a personal level, I late in life have been prescribed ADHD medicine, and just a small dose absolutely changes the way I see the world.
Hmm.
And I was unprepared for how that sort of subtle difference is not subtle to me. And
From what to what?
well, like noticing issues of impulsivity where I thought I would have sworn, like, I'm a person who likes to do X, or like struggles that I would have where yeah, these things in prioritization, like if somebody asked me to do something, all of a sudden saying no is so easy. um there's a lot of like emotional stuff around in that, like saying no, about like rejection, where just this slight chemical switch was enough for me to be like, oh, I don't need to worry about rejecting people. It's not about me, and it's not about me rejecting them deeply as a human being. And there was nothing like logical. It was just the difference of the chemical inside of me, where I would just struggle with that all the time, where I was like, oh, if I say no, there it's like I'm saying no to them as a person, as a soul, and I just never have those conflicts in my brain while I'm medicated.
Wow.
And it gave me a crisis because I was big into free will, and I was like, well, I've had free will. I've done some things that you would just never do it if you didn't have free will.
Well, it's like two different versions of free will, right? It's the one where you're like tethered to some kind of empathic structure, and the other one where maybe that's been reined in a little bit. And you can kind of be more deliberative. don't know.
Uh,
So you're
there
a
was,
cyborg. I think we all are.
yeah, I definitely think that we are all cyborgs. I agree with that, especially the phone thing. It's so obvious. Like it doesn't matter that it's not plugged in. Um, I think there's a good for all technology, but like glasses seem obviously cyborg. Um, yeah. Thank you everybody for this lovely conversation. You guys had awesome things to say. And if you are up for continuing it, and especially if you guys want to talk about some of the other very interesting stories that are in the book, we are going to be hanging out in Discord in a chat room there. And I am going to throw up that link. I am also going to spam the link for the next book club. I would love to have you guys sign up. We've got 3 awesome books. And yeah, goodbye. I will see you all hopefully in the green room on